Marxism, communism are no different from monarchy and fascism. They are only tools to control populations and use them as their slaves. Machiavellian exploitation of Marxist ideals, a historical analysis. Throughout history, political leaders and regimes have often adopted the Machiavellian approach of exploiting ideologies for their own gain. One prime example of this manipulation can be found in the utilization of Marxist theories by certain governments, such as the former Soviet Union and Communist China. These regimes claimed to champion the cause of the working class but, in reality, employed these ideologies to consolidate power, control their societies, and enrich themselves. This essay delves into the Machiavellian exploitation of Marxism by these regimes, illustrating how they resembled monarchies more than genuine socialist states. The USSR, from Marxist ideals to totalitarianism. Karl Marx's theory of communism was based on the principles of a classless society where the means of production would be collectively owned and wealth would be distributed equally among all members of society. However, when the Bolsheviks led by Vladimir Lenin seized power in the Russian Revolution of 1917, they soon realized that the implementation of pure Marxism would not serve their interests. Instead, they transformed the Soviet Union into a fascist state in which the Communist Party's top echelons enjoyed privileges and opulence comparable to the high society in Paris. Lenin and his successor, Joseph Stalin, wielded power with an iron fist. They manipulated Marxist ideology to justify the ruthless suppression of dissent, extensive state control over all aspects of life, and the establishment of a totalitarian regime. While the Soviet propaganda machine promoted the idea of a classless society, a privileged ruling elite emerged, living lavish lives while the masses suffered in poverty. These leaders, far from adhering to Marxist ideals, used the ideology as a smokescreen to justify their autocratic rule and amass enormous personal wealth. Communist China under Mao Zedong, a similar tale. The story of the People's Republic of China under Mao Zedong mirrors the Machiavellian exploitation of Marxism seen in the USSR. Mao, like Lenin, portrayed himself as a champion of the working class and a proponent of Marxist principles. However, his rule saw the emergence of a repressive regime that curtailed individual freedoms, silenced dissent, and perpetuated a cult of personality. Mao's Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution resulted in catastrophic consequences for the Chinese people, causing widespread famine and social upheaval. While the masses toiled and suffered, Mao and his inner circle enjoyed a life of privilege and opulence. The corruption and authoritarianism within the Chinese Communist Party were in stark contrast to the equality and proletarian solidarity espoused by Marxist theory. In conclusion, the historical evidence makes it clear that the USSR and Communist China under Mao were not true Marxist societies but rather Machiavellian states that exploited Marxist ideals to perpetuate their control and enrich themselves. In both cases, the ruling elites used the guise of communism to justify totalitarianism, silencing dissent, and amassing personal wealth at the expense of the people they claimed to represent. This Machiavellian approach to Marxism is a stark reminder of the capacity of political leaders to manipulate ideologies for their own gain. While the ideals of Marxism may have initially resonated with many who sought a more just and equal society, the reality in these cases was far removed from the utopian vision put forth by Karl Marx. Instead, they were instances of power-hungry leaders employing ideology as a tool to secure their own positions and interests, much like the monarchs of old who ruled with unchecked authority. Contemporary Machiavellian exploitation of ideologies in China and Russia. The Machiavellian approach to exploiting ideologies for political gain continues to be a prevalent feature of contemporary politics. In this essay, we will examine how China, under the leadership of Xi Jinping, and Russia, under Vladimir Putin, have leveraged ideological narratives to maintain their authority, consolidate power, and enrich themselves, reminiscent of the historical examples of the USSR and Communist China. China under Xi Jinping, the reimagination of Marxism. Xi Jinping's leadership in China represents a modern-day example of the manipulation of ideological principles. On the surface, the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, still professes adherence to Marxism. However, it has significantly redefined and manipulated these ideals to consolidate its power. Xi Jinping's Chinese dream emphasizes national rejuvenation and economic development but also underscores the party's absolute control. This narrative allows the CCP to maintain its autocracy while justifying its heavy-handed approach to dissent and social control. At the same time, Xi Jinping's anti-corruption campaign, while ostensibly targeting corruption within the party, has also been used to purge political rivals and centralize power in his hands. While the average Chinese citizen is subject to strict surveillance and censorship, the Communist Party elite, including Xi Jinping himself, continue to enjoy a life of privilege and luxury. This stark contrast between the leadership's opulence and the controlled lives of ordinary citizens demonstrates a Machiavellian approach that uses the communist ideology as a facade to legitimize the ruling elite's rule and self-enrichment. Russia under Vladimir Putin, the revival of Soviet nostalgia. In Russia, Vladimir Putin has employed a different Machiavellian strategy by reviving Soviet-era nostalgia. While the Soviet Union officially dissolved in 1991, Putin has subtly embraced its historical legacy to consolidate his power. Putin has framed himself as a defender of traditional Russian values and a bulwark against Western liberalism. This narrative resonates with a significant portion of the Russian population, who remember the Soviet era with a certain level of nostalgia. By positioning himself as a strong leader who stands up to the West, Putin has garnered popular support, allowing him to maintain his grip on power for more than 2 decades. However, much like the leaders of the USSR, Putin's regime is characterized by authoritarianism, suppression of political opposition, and a lack of transparency. The Kremlin wields significant control over the media, limiting the flow of information and suppressing any criticism. As a result, Putin's government remains unaccountable and effectively immune to scrutiny. While portraying himself as a defender of Russia, Putin's rule has seen the concentration of wealth among a select group of oligarchs, mirroring the autocracy of the Soviet-era leadership. In conclusion, China under Xi Jinping and Russia under Vladimir Putin exemplify how contemporary leaders continue to employ Machiavellian strategies to manipulate ideologies for their own advantage. In both cases, the ruling elites have redefined and repurposed ideological narratives to maintain power, suppress dissent, and accumulate personal wealth while presenting a facade of adherence to their respective ideologies. These examples underscore the enduring nature of political manipulation and the adaptability of leaders in employing ideological narratives to serve their own interests. While the rhetoric may differ, the underlying mechanisms of control and exploitation remain remarkably consistent, reflecting the enduring influence of Machiavellian principles in modern politics.